Hey there, it's John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to another day of Amonkhet previews. Things are starting to wind down, but we do have a lot of cards to talk about today, so I want to get right into it. Quickly before we get started though, if you check out the description below, you'll find a couple ways to help support the channel. Both are greatly appreciated, especially now. But Patreon is one of them, and you'll see that in the link below, and we're actually really close to one of our goals, so if you have a chance, check that out. Another way to support us is through our Amazon affiliate store links. If you make any purchases from any Amazon sellers through those links, a small percentage will come back to help support the channel. It really goes a long, long way for us, so thank you to everyone who's engaged in that. All right, let's get into the cards, and we're going to start off with some tokens today. First two tokens we're going to look at are Glyph Keeper and Sacred Cat. These are actually cards we've seen prior but have not seen their token version yet, so I just wanted to show those to you real quick. Now let's move on to some Embalm tokens that we actually have not seen the cards revealed yet, so they are giving us a little bit of a glimpse into some cards that will be spoiled over the next 24 hours. First we have Aven Initiate, 3/2 flyer. We have Aven Wind Guide, 2/3 flying vigilance. Creature tokens you control have flying and vigilance. Heartpiercer Manicore, this is a zombie Manicore for 3, and when this enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, this deals damage equal to that creature's power to target creature or player. Labyrinth Guardian, Zombie Illusion Warrior 2/3, when this becomes the target of a spell, sacrifice it. That could be interesting, maybe it's a cheap casting cost blue creature that's a 2/3. Crop Skirmisher, Zombie Naga Warrior, Vanilla 2/1, and finally, Unwavering Initiate, Vigilance 3/2, Zombie Human Warrior. So this is just a quick preview, I guess, into some cards we're going to be seeing over the next 24 hours. Alright, let's move on to the tokens that are just your regular tokens in the set. We have a Cat token with Lifelink 1/1 and a Warrior Vigilance 1/1. We have a Drake token in blue, 2/2 flyer. Black has a 1/1 Insect and a 2/2 Zombie. Green gets 4 with a 4/2 Beast, a 3/3 Hippo, a 1/1 Death Touch Snake, and a 5/5 Worm. And finally, we get the Gideon Emblem. Alright, let's quickly look at a couple invocations that have recently been revealed. We have Bantu and Rona. So these are the last two invocations. We've already looked at these cards over the last few days, so if you want to hear my thoughts on them, definitely check out the playlist. But at least today I want to show you the invocations. Now let's get into the new stuff. And we'll start off with Gideons Intervention. 2 white and 2. It's an enchantment, rare. When this enters the battlefield, choose a card name. Your opponents can't cast spells with the chosen name. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to you and permanents you control by sources with the chosen name. Now, this is very similar to a lot of cards that we've seen in Magic's past. Although the cards in the past, you'll find some better versions of this. Easier to cast versions because they have lower casting costs or less of a color commitment, things of that nature. But we are restricted in standard to the last few sets, right? So because of that, this could see some standard play maybe out of sideboards. As far as limited goes, you're probably not going to start this out in your deck until you know what your opponent's playing. But if you come across a problematic card that you just don't have an answer to, you could side this in. It's not the most efficient answer to a threat, but it is an answer nonetheless. You may need it at times. Alright, next we have a Ketra's Attendant, and on the right side you see the Embalm token. But it's cost 2 white and 3, it's a bird soldier with flying, cycling 2, Embalm, 2 white and 3, and it's a 3/3. Yesterday I kind of made the joke that the Sphinx, the 5/3 flyer in blue that we saw, its worst enemy would be 2 3/3 flyers. Well, guess what? Here's a card that's basically 2 3/3 flyers. So as far as standard goes, though, I think it's a little overcosted. You're not going to play this just as an answer to the Sphinx or anything like that. But in limited, this is one of the best limited cards I think I've seen previewed so far. This is phenomenal. First off, I'm happy to play a 3/3 Vigilance Flyer for 5 in limited any day of the week anyway. Now you throw Cycling and Embalm on top of it. I love the interaction between those two mechanics. If early on you have trouble getting to 5 mana or getting to 2 white, okay, you cycle it away, you try to hit that land and play it later. And if you don't have mana issues or don't need anything else, then you just go ahead and play it once. When it does eventually die, you get to play it again. That's really a persistent, aggressive threat that your opponent's going to have to deal with. Fantastic card. I think this can be first pickable in a lot of packs. Next we have Commit to Memory. This one's a rare, blue and 3 for the commit side. It's an instant. Put target spell or non-land permanent into its owner's library, second from the top. Memory, 2 blue and 4, Sorcery Aftermath. Each player shuffles his or her hand or graveyard into his or her library, then draws 7 cards. All right, let's talk about the commit side first. I think this is fine for you in limited. It does act as a counterspell, even though it's more of a tempo play because the card does go back to the player's library, second from the top. It's also good to deal with the threat that's on the board that you can't immediately deal with. Gives you that tempo play, a little time to figure out how to deal with it, maybe draw a counterspell or something like that. So I do like that for limited. I do feel like it might be a little overcosted for what it's doing for standard. I just think we have a lot of economical control cards right now, so I don't know if we would need that one. Now, the memory side, I actually don't really like this at all, quite honestly. Now, actually more than a few months ago, it's been over a year now, Magic Origins came out and had Days Undoing, and I did a review of the card when it was previewed and everything, like I'm doing now. And I remember saying at the time, I didn't think Days Undoing was a very good card. I figured maybe someone would be able to think of something to do with it, but for the most part, I did not like the fact that I'm time twisting and my turn's ending, and I'm not able to respond till after my opponent gets to play with their 7 new cards. And I had a real problem with that. Yes, Time Twister is a very powerful effect, but there's a few things that make Time Twister as powerful as it is. The first is it only costs 3. Okay, Days Undoing did only cost 3. Second is the format it's played in. Vintage, you're drawing 7 of the most powerful cards ever printed. That's a big difference than if you played even regular Time Twister in Standard or Pauper or something like that. Is only as good as what you're drawing, quite honestly. So if you're drawing cards that aren't super broken or anything like that, then all of a sudden Time Twister is going to lose a lot of its luster. The other thing that makes Time Twister good is the fact that, yes, it does cost 3, but in that format, you're going to be able to cast a lot of the cards that you draw before your opponent gets a crack at it. And that puts your opponent on the defensive. Maybe you hold back a counterspell like a Force of Will or something like that. Time Twister becomes amazing and incredibly broken, right? That's not the case here. Basically, this doesn't end your turn like Days Undoing does, but it might as well because it costs 6, and you're not doing a whole lot after you cast it, quite honestly. And you have that same problem you had with Days Undoing. You're drawing 7 cards in a format that is not super broken or anything like that. You're just going to get fair Magic cards. Your opponent's going to get fair Magic cards, and they're going to get first crack at putting them down on the board. That's usually not going to feel good. In Limited, this is very playable. I might even play the memory side if I'm behind and I'm just sort of hoping I hit an answer. And if that's the case, every once in a while it might work out for you. But I think most of the time you might play commit, and memory might just sit there and not do a whole lot. Because if you're ahead, you obviously don't want to risk putting your opponent back into a position where they can equalize, right? So it's just something to think about with that card. I know I got a lot of hate when I reviewed Days Undoing at the time, but I think now a lot of players kind of realize that this is a very particular ability that is only good in certain circumstances, even though in those circumstances it's crazy good enough to become part of the Power 9. Hieroglyphic Illumination, a blue and 3 instant. This is a common. Draw 2 cards and it has cycling for blue. The casting cost is kind of funny here because if I pay 4, I get to cycle it and draw a card. But if I pay 1 blue, I just get to cycle it. So I feel like I'm paying 3 for that additional card. It feels expensive, but it's at instant speed, so I can forgive it. In Standard, at any given time, you're not going to have a whole lot of instant speed draw cards to choose from. So this is going to be a good one. And because of that, I do think we'll see some play in a Standard control deck somewhere down the line. And on top of it, I'm very happy to play this in Limited. I like the fact that I can cycle it cheap or later on. I have 4 mana. I can just go ahead at instant speed at the end of my opponent's turn, draw 2 cards. Vizier of Many Faces. This is another embalm card. You see the token on your right. 2 blue and 2. Creature, Shapeshifter, Cleric. This one's a rare, 0/0. You may have this enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except if Vizier of Many Faces was embalmed. The token has no mana cost. It's white. It's a zombie in addition to its other types. Embalm cost is 2 blue and 3. So basically it's an embalm clone. Not too much more to say about it. Clones are usually a little too expensive and a little too contingent on board state to cross over well into Standard. However, they're great in Limited. Yes, there's still a level of variance there. You have to have something good to clone, but this does allow you to target anything on the battlefield, not just your stuff, so that's always nice. But yeah, you can go ahead and play this, clone the best thing that's out there, and it's really persistent. When it does go away, you get to perhaps do it again. That's pretty awesome, in fact, for Limited. Next we have Shadow of the Grave. This costs a black and 1. It's an instant rare. Return to your hand all cards in your graveyard that you cycled or discarded this turn. So I feel like somebody can break this card in an Eternal format, or maybe even in Modern. I just am trying to wrap my head around it right now. I mean, a few things that came to mind, for example, are maybe this interaction with Seismic Assault. Pitch a bunch of cards, do damage, get those cards back, pitch them again. I haven't really thought of any sort of deck list or anything, but at least it's a starting point, perhaps for Modern or maybe even Legacy. Don't know if we could quite get there. As far as Standard goes, I'm thinking about this card with maybe things like Noose Constrictor or perhaps Flameblade Adept. Those could be a couple cards that could combo pretty well with this and do some early damage potentially if your opponent didn't have an answer. Now that does feel a little cute and would have to have more than just that going for it as far as a standard build, but it could be a combo that you might be able to work into an existing aggressive deck or something like that. As far as limited goes, I feel like if you have a lot of cycling cards in your particular deck, then running this and perhaps finding a little extra value for 2 mana might not be the worst thing in the world. It probably won't always make your cut, and it would definitely only be for decks that are playing a lot of cycling. But it's at least limited playable, I would say, if nothing else. But many times it probably will just be in your sideboard. This is a Portuguese language spoiler. Roughly translated, it disposes a black and 2 sorcery. Name an artifact card. Search for any number of copies of the named card in target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library and exile them. That player then will shuffle. Now, I talked about this yesterday, but they are really trying to shut down the artifact theme in Kaladesh, right, in Standard. And that's not unusual. I mean, typically when you move on to a new plane and a new block, they try to shut down some of the mechanics from the old block so that the new cards can flourish and you get a chance to play with your new cards, and that totally makes sense. There is a lot of artifact hate in this set, and we keep seeing some really powerful and affordable artifact hate. Now, black typically doesn't have great answers for artifacts, but they created a card that gets rid of artifacts, but still feels very black. So I think this is good design. Now, the reason I think they are so in tune to the fact that they want to make sure that there's answers in multiple colors is just the fact that artifacts are just so easily splashed into any deck. So they want to make sure every archetype out there has the ability to do something about those Mardu vehicle style decks and stuff like that. Remember, when they were designing these cards, I mean, they knew Heart of Kirin was going to exist. They probably thought Smuggler's Copter was not going to be banned, right? So they definitely wanted to work a lot of good answers in. This is just another one of them. Next, we have a card that comes to us from a Chinese simplified language spoiler. It's Harvest Season. A green and 2, sorcery. Search for up to X basic land cards from your library and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Then shuffle your library. X is equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. Now, a few sets ago, back in the Innistrad block, we saw Cryptolith Rite. And that was a card that a lot of folks were working with, trying to brew into a very powerful ramp deck. It never quite pushed through and got there, although it felt like it probably should have had the power to do so. But once we got into the world of Kaladesh, even though there were more pieces given that would make that deck effective, it also felt like it was maybe being overshadowed by just the power level of some of the artifacts. I mean, the vehicles, Mardu vehicle decks started to really shine, as well as the Marvel decks, and of course the 4-color Saheeli decks, and it just kind of got drowned out in that picture. But now that we know there's so much anti-artifact out there, that perhaps this might be the time for that deck to finally be able to have its day. This card really plays well with Cryptolith Rite. I think there might be a chance. Now, ramp decks in general sometimes have a hard time getting a foothold in Standard due to the fact that they can be high variance. Sometimes you draw all your ramp and not your things you're trying to ramp into, or vice versa. But they do work. We have seen some great Standard ramp decks like Wolf Run Ramp, for example, from Channel Fireball a number of years ago in the first Innistrad block, and that was a extremely powerful Standard deck. So every once in a while the pieces do come together and the opportunity presents itself for that particular archetype. Maybe this is a card that's going to bring that archetype into the Tier 1 level. I guess we'll have to wait and see, but it's pretty exciting. Now, as far as other formats go, I mean, this is a fun Commander card. I'd be really happy to play it there because there's a lot of good interactions that you could pair with this card. Another one that comes to mind when I'm thinking Commander, for example, is Earthcraft, which is an older card, but it combos really well with this. And finally, in Limited, is this worth playing? I think you can find some value here. I mean, it's not an auto-include, obviously, but if you feel like you have a lot of opportunity to even just play this for 3 and grab a couple lands, and you feel like there's something worth ramping into or speeding up into, even if it's more mid-range or slightly higher casting cost, not necessarily some big game finisher or anything. It could still be fine for you in some of those decks. Next we have Sandworm Convergence. It's 2 green and 6. This is a rare enchantment. Creatures with flying can attack you or planeswalkers you control. At the beginning of your end step, create a 5/5 green worm creature token. Well, first off, this will be awesome in Commander. I mean, this is a perfect Commander card. A little bit expensive, but very castable in Commander. Shuts down flying creatures, especially a lot of flying commanders out there that could be getting across for damage. And it allows you to gum up your board with 5/5 creatures. So it could be good in a number of different types of decks, including Pillow Fort or just anything that's just looking for like big creatures or tokens or anything like that. So I love the card there. Could this cross over into Standard? Well, we were talking about potentially a ramp deck. Maybe this is something that you could ramp into. It's possible. Some folks definitely have looked at this card and thought maybe Marvel decks. Although, I do think Marvel decks will be putting up with a lot of artifact hate going forward, so I don't know how viable they're going to be as far as a competitive Tier 1 deck. I guess time will tell on that. But there's a chance. There's at least a chance that this maybe could show up in some kind of ramp deck. As for limited, it can be a little expensive and tricky to get to sometimes, so you are going to want a little bit of ramp support there. And we did see a card just now that helps you get there, and there's another one coming up that's going to help too. So know your deck. If you have some ways to maybe search up some basic lands or something like that, it's probably playable. But if you don't have some support for this card, you might want to go with another strategy. Next we have a card that comes to us from a Chinese traditional language spoiler, and that's Blood Fury Militant. It's a red and 1 Minotaur Warrior, 4/3, and when this enters the battlefield, discard a card. It's an uncommon. Alright, this card is kind of nuts. First off, I want to point out, the other day we saw the Minotaur Lord, and I kind of made the comment, we haven't seen a whole lot of Minotaurs. Well, here's a Minotaur, so there you go, maybe we'll see some more. But more importantly, 2 casting cost, 4/3? What's the drawback? I have to discard a card? Alright, sign me up. Like, that's pretty awesome, actually. This card is super pushed, and it's uncommon. Like, you're going to see a few of these moving around through a draft. That's insane to me. And you do have to take into account, discarding doesn't necessarily even mean a drawback all the time. There's madness cards out there for Standard, not to mention embalm cards, as well as aftermath cards, which you'll even find in your limited environments. Like, this is awesome. Red has been super, super pushed. I have no doubt there's going to be either a mono red and or a Rakdos aggro deck with the cards that red has been getting. This is nuts. 4/3 for 2 mana and just start beating down early on. This is just a red player's dream. I mean, fantastic, fantastic card. I don't even know what else more to say about it. It could be a little fragile in Modern because you do have to deal with things like Lightning Bolt there, but even so, the casting cost is so low. I wouldn't mind trying it in some sort of aggressive deck in Modern, maybe just to kind of see how it plays out, but definitely awesome for Standard. Alright, next we have the last mythic that needed to be revealed. It's Glorious End, a red and 2 instant, end the turn. At the beginning of your next end step, you lose the game. Well, that's pretty simple. So, where does this card make sense? Does it make sense anywhere? Well, first off, I will say it's giving red access to something that red typically doesn't have, basically counter magic. It's countering anything that's on the stack when you play this card, and it's exiling it furthermore, not even just countering it. And it's stopping things like perhaps the entire combat step that would be coming up if it's the first main phase, something like that. So it really does just take your opponent's turn away if you wanted to, and even maybe get rid of some problematic spells. Very unique for red. How do you deal with the drawback of losing the game at the end of your next turn? Well, you're going to have a plan for that. Things like maybe the new Gideon, for example, that can make an emblem that says you can't lose the game. Platinum Angel style effects, basically, that type of thing. So where do you actually put this into action? Perhaps a Storm deck where you have an opponent who you know you can beat if you can untap. They play something that might be problematic for you going off. Then you just simply say, nope, end the turn, exile that spell, and you're able to go off and hopefully win the game. That could be one way to look at this. Now, I do think playing this with, say, Gideon in Standard is going to be a little too high variance. So I don't know if it quite gets there. This is a card, though, that potentially could see some play, maybe in some Eternal formats or perhaps Commander, if you have a deck that you feel like really could go off and win the game. Commander would be good, because if you have the combo in hand that you need, but maybe you just don't have the mana yet to cast it, you have to wait till your next turn. This might help you get a little bit closer if somebody's going to play something that's going to make you discard the combo or something like that. So in that regard, I could see it perhaps seeing play, but I do feel like all the scenarios I'm coming up with are kind of unique scenarios, which makes me feel like most of the time this is going to be stuck in my hand without a good opportunity to play it, and that doesn't feel super good to me. So I don't know about this one. I'm not sure how to feel about it. Like, I do think it has some definite interesting qualities, especially for a red card, but practically, can it translate that into actually good gameplay? I'm not so sure. Someone would have to really work hard to brew something to find the full potential of this card, I think. Alright, let's look at some split cards with beginning to end. This comes to us from a French language spoiler. The beginning side is a white and 2 instant. Create 2 1/1 white warrior creature tokens with vigilance. End is a black and 2 sorcery aftermath. As an additional cost to end, sacrifice a creature. Destroy target creature. Now, when I first saw this card, my first thought was, this is actually a pretty good limited card. Like, I don't mind getting 1/1 creatures at instant speed. Sometimes they work as combat tricks. And then later on, when this is in my graveyard, I pay a couple of extra, and I'm able to get a slightly expensive Bone Splinters effect. Yeah, I'm okay with that. But the more I thought about it, I kind of thought, you know, there's a chance we could see a white weenie deck at some point make it into Standard. And if you splash a little black, and you're using cards like Always Watching, and this, could be interesting. It could be a card that might see some Standard play. You also have the possibility of this making it into like an Orzhov or Esper zombie deck too. So there are a lot of good cards out there. Don't know for sure if this one will make the cut when it comes to Standard builds, but I wouldn't count it out yet. I think there's at least some potential for it, just considering the power level of some of the creature decks in those colors. Next we have an uncommon. It's Spring to Mind. It's a green and 2 for the spring part. Sorcery, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle your library. And then the Mind side, 2 blue and 4, instant aftermath, draw 2 cards. This is a fine limited card. Like, you'll be happy to run this, especially if you want to ramp a little bit, or maybe more likely fix your mana. Maybe you're splashing for a third color. The second part, very, very playable and limited. It feels a little expensive at 6, but drawing 2 cards at instant speed can be quite good for you later in the game, especially when you're running out of cards, running out of things to do. It can actually turn around some games. Here's what I really like about this design. I think most new players will see the value in Spring, especially if they're trying to splash a third color or something. Mind is the type of card that a lot of new players will probably overlook when they see that casting cost and the effect that is tied to it. So what's cool about this is I think some players will play this for the Spring side, get the Mind side basically for free, and then later on in the game realize, wow, you know what? I'm out of answers, I'm out of cards, but I have this Mind side sitting in my graveyard for 6 mana. At the end of my opponent's turn, I play it, draw 2 cards. Wow, this was actually pretty good for me. I think a lot of times limited players will think about their creature count, they'll think about their land count, they'll think about removal, and they'll try to put in some cute combo. But at the end of the day, the draw spell sometimes ends up getting cut. And that draw spell, even if it's something that's not super powerful, like the Mind side of this card, it can turn around games. And players might even be better off dropping the cute combo and just putting the draw spell in, quite honestly. And I think this is a card that's going to teach newer players the power of a card like that and how it doesn't look like it's great, but it actually can do a lot of good things in a lot of circumstances. So I think this is a really cool design. Alright, next we have 2 lands. First is Cradle of the Accursed. This is a desert land. It's a common. You can tap it for colorless mana, or you can pay 3, tap and sack it to get a 2/2 zombie token, but you can only do this anytime you can play a sorcery. The second one, Grasping Dunes, land desert, uncommon. Tap for colorless mana, pay 1, tap sack. Put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. Activate this ability anytime you can cast a sorcery. Only anytime. The sorcery clause really slows these cards down. That's my first issue with them. And it's kind of sad because we saw the other day the green creature that you could cycle for 4 and it lets you look for a desert and put it into play on tap. So I was hoping for some good targets for that. These aren't super exciting, quite honestly. I mean, they're fine in certain circumstances and limited. But there's a couple things you do want to think about if you do play these in limited. The first is you probably don't want to make them part of your mana count. I mean, it seems like they're just a land with some bonus on top, but you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're getting strangled on your color requirements because you're running these as a couple of your lands or something like that. That can put you in a bad place. So if you do run these for whatever reason, you probably want to run them in the spell slot and act as if they're a spell and not a land. Secondly, like I said, they just feel really, really slow. There are maybe potentially some things you can do with them. I mean, like I said, the second one, -1/-1 counters do matter sometimes. So every once in a while that will come into effect in limited. Again, in limited, if you're in the zombie deck, Cradle of the Accursed could be fine for you there. Outside of limited, yeah, I don't really see it, quite honestly. I mean, maybe you could try to do some things with like Life from the Loam and Cradle of the Accursed and just keep bringing it back and getting more zombies. But I just don't think it's fast enough for the mana requirement, quite honestly. I mean, it might be something to play with and try to brew and see if you can get it to work, but it just doesn't feel like it would quite get there. Same thing for standard. I just feel like it's a little too slow. So yeah, I'm not super thrilled about these cards. They do have a limited role in some draft or sealed decks though, probably. Next we have Cascading Cataracts. This one is a rare. It's a land, indestructible, and you can tap for colorless mana, or you can pay 5 and tap and add 5 mana in any combination of colors to your mana pool. That's actually kind of awesome for Commander. Like, I don't really see it being played in Standard or even Limited because you're probably not trying to go that deep with colors, but I could certainly see this as an almost auto-include in so many Commander decks. Like, if you're playing more than 2 colors, like, why not run this thing at that point, right, in Commander? So, this is actually pretty awesome. Great design. I like the art on it. It looks really amazing. I bet this is an incredible-looking foil, too. Having said that, those are the cards for today. Now, later this afternoon at 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern time, Mark Rosewater is going to be doing a Twitch stream talking about the set. I'm sure he's going to reveal more cards at that point. And the next morning, tomorrow morning, we're actually going to get the rest of the set revealed. So we begin our full set review tomorrow, probably a little bit later in the afternoon, once I get all of the cards and have a little time to wrap my head around them. But until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.